Man is the only known creature that can contemplate his own future, can contemplate not only the years that lie ahead of him, but also can consider what lies beyond his present physical embodiment. Because he has this faculty, it was inevitable that early peoples should contemplate the problem of life after death. Originally, this problem rested squarely upon the clergy, or upon the priesthoods, or the medicine priests, or the shamans, who led the spiritual destiny of the people. Later, however, a certain structure of inquiry crept in. Many were no longer willing to simply accept on faith and faith alone. They had confidence in their religious leaders, but some way a conflict came about between the teachings of the religious and the daily experiences of human life. By degrees, therefore, the custodians of the doctrine of the afterlife changed the states. And from the priesthood, the tradition passed to the philosophical schools and the intellectual systems. The philosophical schools, of course, had their origins in the religious, and therefore, for the most part, followed along the general religious concepts. However, they tried to rationalize the doctrines of the clergies. They tried to prove intellectually, rationally, reasonably, that the teaching of immortality was philosophically sound, that it could be defended as well as accepted. The moment, of course, you defend something, someone else is unhappy about it and assails your defense. While the belief was held largely by the priesthood, and the priesthood almost completely dominated the public mind, there was very little criticism or conflict in basic religious convictions. However, when the intellectual schools took over, there were certain disagreements among themselves, and a waiting public was not satisfied that the philosophers completely solved the problem. The philosophers seemed to make it more reasonable, but they did very little to the chronic doubter who continued to doubt and wanted some kind of physical evidence to support the religious and philosophical interpretations. This continued to be a problem for a long time and is still a problem in a great many personal lives and in a great many beliefs and schools. Finally, it came about that the newborn and rather precocious infant of the 17th century, science, became involved in the problem. Science was reluctant to take any part in the situation, on the ground that science dealt with things that were physical, obvious, and could be examined, placed under laboratory controls, and could become the basis of research theses for those looking for a doctorate. The result of this was that the physical, materialistic scientists rather preferred not to become involved. Privately, they might admit a belief, or they might deny any belief. But for the most part, the scientist took an agnostic position. He did not deny the possibility, but he pronounced solemnly that no proof was available And in his own opinion, there would be no proof that would satisfy him that man could accumulate. Now, in the last 25 years, things have become somewhat more complicated in the personal life of the individual. He has become more interested in living. He also has become more interested in questioning the reasons for his own existence. It was easy in early times to say that all these things were locked in the will of heaven, that God alone knew why these things happened. Gradually, however, it became essential to the human mind that it begin to understand why God did what he did. And out of this came questioning, and came a rising group of mystics and persons concerned with a new approach to trying to solve the problem. And that approach became closely associated with the rise of the psychological schools. Psychology seemed for a moment to be the open door into the world of the human mystery. Psychology, however, was largely academic, and most psychologists were as reluctant to discuss metaphysics as were the material scientists themselves. The psychologists did do considerable groundwork, but always it was dominated, at least publicly, by the patterns of academic procedure. Gradually, however, a new school has arisen among the scientific people. Younger men and women coming into the sciences, arising in medicine, in psychology, psychiatry, all of these counseling subjects. These people have become more and more vitally concerned with the problem of the true nature of the human being. And it has gradually come to be admitted that there is much evidence that the one life theory on which most modern world thinking has been established is simply not adequate. The only way you can justify it is to frustrate everything else. In order to justify the one life theory, you have to take the universe apart and throw the parts away. You cannot work into an intelligent concept of life. We cannot assume that the universe is meaningful, or that there is a pattern of purposes behind the various manifestations in astronomy, physics, biology, and related fields. So it has gradually become more popular to suspect that there is a larger invisible background to evolution than we have been inclined to accept. We are beginning to realize that the world is very much like the iceberg, that the greater part of it is under water and cannot be seen, that a greater part of our physical existence is invisible, and that we are simply living on the certain peaks of knowledge that rise above the surface of the ocean of the unknown. The unknown, however, must be important. There must be something there that explains the known, because even with the best scientific advancement, the known does not explain itself, nor does man find suitable, satisfactory, and solutional answers to the various mysteries of his own existence. So we have this type of problem, and we have inherited it from our forebears, and we probably will always be faced with it. In the Western world, we have assumed that there was a certain survival factor, and that factor was largely dominated by a theological concept of punishment and reward. The individual leaving this world went to a desert. He went to something that he had earned. He went to the judgment of his existence. If he had lived well, he had a fair chance of a benevolent condition in the afterlife. If he had lived miserably and been a cruel and dishonorable person, he would be subject to strange punishments, and all kinds of unpleasant diagrams, figures, paintings, etc. have been produced to indicate the condition of a soul in purgatory or perdition. This, however, was more or less a moral problem, and undoubtedly it frightened a number of generations into a state of conformity with prevailing opinions. We can't say that it increased virtue because of any great desire to be better. It increased virtue because of fear of punishment after death. Gradually, however, this has lost its flavor and has lost its impulse to condition human thinking. The average person today is not really heaven and hell conscious. He is not much interested in the thought, and down in the heart and soul of himself he does not believe that this doctrine is going to seriously affect him as a person. He is more apt to follow the idea that there is no life after death, and therefore all speculation is useless. He would rather be an atheist and believe in nothing than be a theist and believe in some of the things his ancestors accepted. It just did not seem to make sense. So now we have these new fields coming in. We have parapsychology. We have a tremendous increase in interest in psychic phenomena. We have more and more books being written every day reporting conditions of suspended animation and the probabilities of the survival of consciousness after death. These reports are met with a variety of reactions. Those who have always been of the idealistic mind simply smile and say, well, after 5,000 years, they've caught up with the facts we always accepted. Others still remain uncertain, and every book favoring life after death will somewhere along the line be faced with another book denying the premises in the one which has been previously issued. So the problem goes on, and there seems to be no really easy way to answer this question. Now, we also know that the average human being has certain faculties which he likes to use, and the divine power and its infinite wisdom has bestowed upon the individual a power of intuition. It has also given him the power to evolve, liberate, and develop mysterious, subtle powers, attitudes, and levels of consciousness locked within himself. And gradually a number of rather progressive thinkers have centered their attention upon the simple fact that the only way in which the average person can convince himself completely, beyond any question of doubt, and find the final evidence for the certainty of his own immortality is to search within himself for the instruments of this knowledge. He must finally discover that within his own nature are the instruments necessary to convince him of life after death. He will have to experience life after death ultimately. And in the meantime, he has powers to research his own inner life, to determine by means of the development of extrasensory gamut the conditions of life which he cannot see. And all of the research up to the present time that is carried on within enlightened individuals, for the most part, supports the idea of the continuity of human consciousness. Now, while the West was approaching all this in its normal manner, Western people have always been more or less objective, and they object easily to almost anything.